The eye it cannot choose but see. We cannot bid the ear be still. Our bodies feel, where'er they be, against or with our will. Welcome to the Troubadour Podcast, and this is Sunday Morning Poetry. Today we will be reading the poem Expostulation and Reply by William Wordsworth in his 1798 lyrical ballads. Now, an expostulation is a specific way of reasoning or attempting to reason with someone in order to turn them away from a path that they are going on. So you're going to get a conversation. This is one of the conversation poems that Wordsworth has written. I did several poems of the Matthew poems earlier, which are not in the 1798 lyrical ballads generally. There's the 2 April Mornings and the Fountain. And there are several places where he has poetry that he brings out Matthew. And Matthew tends to be an older schoolmaster, and it's one of his aggregate characters, like Lucy, who's probably based on a variety of women and folk tales that he's heard. And Matthew is based on a schoolmaster. And in this particular poem, Expostulation and Reply, it's probably actually based, or it's very likely, or pretty much guaranteed, because William said so in some letters, that it's based on or inspired by a conversation he had with the essayist William Hazlitt, not the later 200 years later Henry Hazlitt, who wrote Economics in One Lesson. This is a famous essayist of the time, contemporary with William Wordsworth. And they had a conversation about the importance of book learning and versus learning in nature and different ways of learning things. And so it's a very brief argument that they have in this poem, Matthew and William. So there's two characters here. There's going to be William and then Matthew, who's talking to them. There's going to be a lot of dialogue in poetic form, of course. And it's an iambic tetrameter, I believe. And there's rhymes at the end of every line. So it's a lyrical poem, like many of the other ones. It's a straight poem that rhymes, and but it's in conversation, and there's dialogue, and he's saying something to him. He's expostulating about this. You'll see a kind of an argument that we'll talk about afterward. And so one of the things that I wanted to bring up before I read the poem, which is not a long poem, and then we'll go through it afterward, is the Romantics, especially and Wordsworth particularly, are often saddled with this idea that they are completely anti-book learning, rationality, and things of that nature. I have been arguing that this is a huge mistake to think of them in this way. It's true that they were rebelling against a certain form of rationalism, which in a sense turned people away from reality itself and into the clouds, into books only. Now, in order to combat that, and the emotions that Wordsworth would put in a very terse poem like this, is he does make an argument that, the Matthew character says, put away your books, or excuse me, why are you sitting on that rock looking at nature? Where are your books, right? And then William's going to say, well, I don't need books. This is all I need. I can learn everything from nature. And so the way that this is always taken is that, people take out little pieces like this of Wordsworth and Coleridge and then toss away everything else they said, including the totality of all their poems, all the essays that they wrote and everything else. And they just kind of say, oh, look, see, they don't like books. It's like, no. They love books. They're very pro books. But there was a feeling in the air in the 1700s that you did not have to look at reality to gain any knowledge, that you could just read what people before you wrote. And usually this is what, you can gain from classics. And the classicists were the closest to reality. They knew what was real, what was beautiful. They put it down in paper. And so all you have to do is read it and understand it, and then kind of tweak with it and play with it and maybe create something new based on it. And Wordsworth and the Romantics said, no, we want to think for ourselves. And that's really what it comes down to. That's really what romanticism comes down to in a deep way, is that they are saying we want to look at reality ourselves. We want to make our own mistakes. We want to grow up in our own way, kind of thing. And so the argument is, I'm going to look out in reality, and nature is a stand-in for reality for the romantics. And it is reality. Nature is reality. We're a part of nature. Now, it's true that the romantics didn't quite, see man as fully part of it sometimes. Like they did separate, naked nature from what man was doing with, industrialization, right? So they didn't see industrialization as a part of the natural process of man. But that would take some time for them to understand. Although they, I would put it as actually they didn't like the extreme nature, because even Wordsworth wrote some beautiful poems about trains. What he didn't like was the complete, just devastation of everything in his view, and just putting up shops and just exploding. Now, this is a different argument that we could talk about the politics of this, because of course that leads to human flourishing. People can live in, longer lives, and more people can live. And if people are good, then we should want more people. There's a lot of value to that. But this is, again, I always make this point. This is like right at the cusp of the Industrial Revolution, and people just don't know what's going on. It's a momentous change. Okay, so this is the argument that we're going to get, though, is that he's going to argue for gaining knowledge by nature. So let's look at how he makes that argument in poetic form. So this is how a poet argues. And he makes, I think, some good points that if you're only into books, reading books, and not going out in reality, that's a problem. And I'll say before I start it, one more thing. One thing that bothers me about America today and the culture of the West today, and particularly in America, is we have completely, to such an extreme degree, it's kind of insane, separated book smart from street smarts. You've heard this before. Oh, he's book smart, but he's not street smart, right? And so there's an idea that, oh, he reads books, but that has no practical value to it. You can't live a good life that way. It's not going to get you money, right? And that's what they, people think. Although I think this mood may be changing slightly. In the 1700s, there was a very, the flip side of this is there was a good understanding and respect for books. I mean, just as in terms of the practicality. So just as an example, 1770s, America, we start to go to war with Britain. The men who fought in that war on the American side had never fought in war before. The generals, the colonels, the leadership of the army were all under 40. Most of them 30 or under even. They were very young, green, not, knowledgeable about war, army. Now, two things had to happen. One, they had to get some experience. So, the war took a while, so they did have to get some, practical experience. But the way that they approached it and the respect they had for learning in books was that books could teach them how to win this war. And I think it did have a big impact from what I've seen. So they would, even concepts like courage, if you know how to actually read, I don't think people today know how to read. And I've made that argument before. If you know how to read, then you know how to say, okay, there's a difference between, obviously, they're teaching you what courage is if you're reading, some ancient Roman book like Caesar, and he's telling you about the Gallic Wars, and you're reading about the importance of courage. Well, you understand that there's a difference if you're reading this in 1775, that there's a difference between obviously reading the book in real life, because your life is on the line, but you can gain actual practical ways of thinking about courage. And then, of course, they got battle strategies, how to think about war, how to think about munitions, how to train men, how to motivate. They got this from books, and they had a deep respect for books because, again, they were not battle-hardened men. They were just farmers. So the point is that there was a deep respect for books during this period. This was a good respect, but the problem becomes for William Wordsworth in Europe in particular when it is a complete cutoff from all of reality, and that books serve as reality, that you look at it and you don't look at nature. You don't look at the world around you. You don't study the things around you. That is a problem for William Wordsworth and the Romantics. Okay, so let's look at this argument that he makes, Mr. William Wordsworth, when it comes to the why we should look at nature. Okay, Expostulation and Reply by William Wordsworth. Why, William, on that old gray stone, thus for the length of half a day, why, William, sit you thus alone, and dream your time away? Where are your books, that light bequeathed to beings else forlorn and blind? Up, and drink the spirit breathed from dead men to their kind. You look round on your mother earth, as if she for no purpose bore you, as if you were her firstborn birth, and none had lived before you. One morning thus, by Esthwaite Lake, when life was sweet, I knew not why, to me my good friend Matthew spake, and thus I made reply. The eye it cannot choose but see, we cannot bid the ear be still. Our bodies feel, where they be, against or with our will. Nor less I deem that there are powers, which of themselves our minds impress, that we can feed this mind of ours in a wise passiveness. Think you, mid all this mighty sum of things forever speaking, that nothing of itself will come, but we must still be seeking? Then ask not wherefore, here alone, conversing as I may, I sit upon this old gray stone and dream my time away. So, simple little poem. And I didn't want to say this before, but I'll say it now, and we'll do this next week. The next poem is actually a companion poem. So I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that there is an extreme value in reading these poems in the lyrical ballads in order, right? Like reading the whole book as a book. I think it's something that's lost on us today, that we no longer read poetry books. We just kind of, read, maybe if we read poetry at all, we read just a random poem, here and there. But there's a real value in reading because they put them together in this order for a reason. So Expostulation and Reply is followed by The Tables Turned, an evening scene on the same subject. And it comes after lines written near Richmond upon the Thames that evening, which I did last week. So, there's a reason that these are being put in this order and these poems are put together. Okay, but let's go through this poem while we're here. Expostulation and Reply. So William is one day, and he says this later on in the poem, one morning thus by Esthwaite Lake. This is, they're called the Lake Poets, Wordsworth and Thomas de Quincey and Coleridge, because they live in this lake district. So there's this lake in England, and he's, one morning thus by Esthwaite Lake, when life was sweet, I knew not why. To me, my good friend Matthew spake, and thus I made reply. So he doesn't, there's two ways to take this line. Either life is sweet and he doesn't know why life is sweet, or life is sweet, he doesn't know why, and he doesn't know why Matthew spoke to him. But either way, his friend comes up to him and talks to him, this Matthew character. And the Matthew character, again, is this schoolmaster. And the Matthew character asks, quote, why, William, on that old gray stone, thus for the length of half a day? Why, William, sit you thus alone and dream your life away? So this is an important set up the question. Everything in this poem is important. So, but he's asking very simply, why are you just sitting there staring dumbly at nature, right? Or not even, he didn't even say nature. Why are you just sitting on that old gray stone, half a day almost, and you're just sitting alone dreaming your life away, right? And there's that view that dreamers are bad, right? That it's not a good thing to be a dreamer because you just dream your life away. And it's like that song, Dream, 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 Dream. I'm not going to sing it. But, like I dream my life away. Like I can, in his mind, in the character, he's dreaming of a woman, of course. I can taste your lips of wine and all the other stuff. And, but I'm dreaming my life away. And, there's truth to that. Of course, if all you do is dream, that's a problem. But then if all you do is act and not dream, that's also a problem, right? So this is kind of a give and take on both of these. And so why are you doing this? Why are you sitting there alone, dreaming your life away, right? Dream your time away. And the second stanza, Matthew continues with his line of inquiry and expostulation. And he says, hey, I'm your school teacher. I'm a wise man. Where are your books that light bequeathed to beings else forlorn and blind? That's what he calls books. Books are a light that are given to beings who would otherwise be forlorn, sad and depressed and melancholy and blind. So it's a light that helps you see. Obviously, this is a reference to knowledge. Up, and drink the spirit. So this is an analogy or a metaphor of drinking knowledge. And there's this kind of view of drinking knowledge in this way, I think, is important. And the way he's using this metaphor. One of the reactions that they're going to get, that's not in this poem, but at least not explicitly, but it's implied, is the view that I think is implicit in rationalism and in classicism, especially in the way that they would teach. And Wordsworth was taught at a very, what we would consider a classical grammar school and education. He went to Cambridge. And it's essentially just a pouring into the mind, like the mind, and this is the analogy they use, the mind was like a cup that had to be filled with the words, essentially, just kind of poured into the brain of a person. And, this is still to this day a large part, a very impactful way of teaching, is that you just pour in facts in their mind, right? It's like a cup, up and drink the spirit. Breathe from dead men to their kind, like breathe from the men who came before you, the Homers, the Horaces, and Copernicus, Galileo, Bahi, Newton, and just, you got to pour all those facts in your head, right? So that metaphor is an important metaphor at this time. Up and drink the spirit, and that idea of drinking from the men that came before you, their thoughts. Now, there's some truth to that, of course, but this is what the Matthew character is making this argument. You should just be drinking from that. You shouldn't be dreaming your life away, right? He's admonishing him. He's expostulating him not to do this thing. And this is a perfect example of classicism versus romanticism. And Matthew is, in this sense, representing classicism, which is stop looking at nature. Stop looking at reality. Stop using your imagination and dreaming. Start pouring facts into your head, man. Just pour them in there. It'll be all right. Trust me. Matthew continues. You look round on your mother earth, as if she for no purpose bore you, as if you were her firstborn birth, and none had lived before you. So this is the last part of his argument. He makes a progeny argument that Mother Earth bore you, right? There's a kind of, you're not the only human being in the world. Men came before you. And this is true, right? You should learn from the men who came before you, especially the great men who wrote it down, and that we have established or created great classics for all of us to understand the world better. And you're not the only purpose or the only person, the earth bore you. And so you should learn about these other men, and then that way you could apply it to your life. Now, this next little stanza is, I believe, it's the only stanza in the whole poem that is not a quotation. It's the narrator of the poem, telling what's going on, right? And because the poem starts off with a quotation. Why are you sitting on that gray stone? And then we don't really know exactly what's going on. We just know someone's speaking to someone. So now we get like what's going on in a sense. One morning thus, by Esthwaite Lake, when life was sweet I knew not why, to me my good friend Matthew spake, and thus I made reply. And so now I'm going to make reply. So in a sense, he's kind of saying like, oh, I'm just sitting sweetly, minding my own business. And all of a sudden this Matthew character, this classicist dude, comes over and says, here, he hits me in the head with the book. Well, I don't want a book. I'm just enjoying my time. Why are you doing this to me? Right. And so now he has to make an argument. So he's going to use, his reasoning abilities to some degree. And, that's what a conversation is. And there's two sides of the conversations. Before that one stanza that's not in quotations. And then there's after. There's the expostulation and the reply. It's very simple. The eye, it cannot choose but see. Okay, so the eye can't choose but see things, right? So that's important. The word choose is important. So we're going to ask, what is choice? Where is the choice come in here? Right? So the eye, it cannot choose but see, which is true. If you open your eyes, you can't really choose what to see. And you can't exactly choose what's in front of you, or you can't control the sensory perception of it. You can, to some degree, you can close your eyes, or you can, only, you can shield your eyes from something if you don't want to see over there. But for the most part, when your eyes are open, it sees what it sees, right? And what hits the sensory perceptual apparatus of your eyeballs, that's what your mind sees, period. We cannot bid the ear be still. Okay, this is also true. Unless you plug your ears, your ears are always going to be hearing things. Our bodies feel wherever they be, wherever they be. So wherever they are, our bodies will feel that, right? So we feel the things around us, whether we, if we touch it, we will feel it, right? Our bodies. So in other words, the sensory perception apparatus is not open to control against or with our will, right? So it's not open to our will, our senses. This is an interest. Okay, so this is true. This is a particular philosophical view that our perceptual awareness is just the way it is, and our senses are a certain thing. They have a certain nature, and it's not really open to our will. We don't have control over that, over the perceptions, right? That's just what hits our eyeballs or our earballs. Nor less I deem that there are powers, which of themselves our minds impress, that we can feed this mind of ours in a wise passiveness. Now, this passiveness is a very intriguing word to me in reading a lot of Wordsworth and Poe, or Wordsworth and Coleridge and the Romantics, because it seems as though, and I think in this case he's kind of making the argument that you could just sit passively and your eyes take in everything, and there's a passiveness to that process, and you will, of course, become wiser, right? Or they will impress upon your mind. Nor less I deem that there are powers which of themselves our minds impress, that we can feed this mind of ours in a wise passiveness. So I deem, no less that there are some powers. Now, what I believe he's saying, in having read him, is that there is a power of the mind that can take what you see in the world and turn it into something. Now, it's not the clearest that I've seen him talk about this, and especially Coleridge, I think, is better at talking about this. But he does kind of indicate it when he talks at the end, which we'll see, about dreaming. And that's what we're getting at. And because he's going to make an argument for dreaming. Dreaming, in a sense, is his stand-in for this poem for imagination. You close your eyes, you dream, you think of something, you're imagining. And, so there's a power he's suggesting here, a power that with the passiveness of our perceptual awareness, there's a power that allows us to think, right? That's the next sentence. Think you, mid all this mighty sum. It's an important phrase there, mighty sum. What is the mighty sum? S-U-M. Nature. It's everything around you. And so there's a totality of you being in this mighty sum, in the summation of everything around you, which you don't get in books. Like when you're reading a book, it's just you block out everything. You just look at translating a word, black splotches on a page. But when you're in nature, you're consumed, your smell, your sight, your touch, your hearing. I mean, if you're, wild, your taste too. You taste like a little whatever, piece of bark or something, or maybe there's food. But you're consumed, encapsulated by nature. There's a mighty sum. So think you, mid all this mighty sum of things forever speaking. So this is a conversational poem, but now there's a mighty sum. Nature is speaking, that nothing of itself will come, but we must still be seeking. So nothing will come of this, nothing of itself will come, but we must still be seeking. So in other words, are you saying that you don't think, William is saying to Matthew, hey, Matthew, are you saying that with all of our senses taking all this in and speaking to us, that we won't gain anything unless we go and, do the kind of classical seeking that you're always advocating, the reading of these great works and the breathing in of all the facts that other men have come into? You don't think that the nature can speak to us as well? Then ask not wherefore here alone, conversing as I may. So he's alone conversing. Who's he conversing with? Nature. And what is conversing, a form of? Reasoning, right? He's reasoning with nature. Conversing as I may, I sit upon this old gray stone and dream my time away. And, so there's the dream part, I think, is his way of saying the imagination. So in simplest terms, Matthew argues you need to read your books, and Wordsworth argues that we need to gain knowledge from nature. That's it. It's as simple as that. Now, as I said at the beginning, there is a sense with the Romantics that they are always anti-books, right? Anti-reason. They're not anti-reason. They're reacting against reason. And there is a huge difference between being against something completely and reacting against a certain form of that thing. So let me just give you an example and things I've talked about on this podcast. I think we live in a time that reveres the body and working out, but not knowledge and gaining knowledge throughout your whole life. So we are encouraged from an early age to work out, to run these marathons. There's all these mud runners and these wrestlers, and like that's what we should revere, is the man who and the woman who goes their whole life through CrossFit into their 70s and 80s, and they become swimmers and this and that, and that's great, and that's what we revere. But somebody who spends their life and their time or their spare time reading a book on regular basis, lots of things like that, where they give up going to parties or traveling in order to read more and to gain knowledge, to take courses on new things, to learn a new skill. That's not revered in the same way. We just, you may think that it is because you may think, oh, that's cool, but it's not in the culture as like that's what we admire. What we admire are the people who, I mean, they just did a movie that I haven't seen, like some lady, a chubby woman runs a marathon, like Sarah runs a marathon or something. It's about that. Now, I didn't see it. I don't know much about it, but I suspect there's something along the lines of she's chubby and unhappy and people don't like her. And then all of a sudden she starts running. And in the process of it, she starts to love with herself, and she doesn't need, she learns that, being healthy is good, and she doesn't, blah, blah. But there's an idea that, it's why couldn't she be someone who was healthy? Like, you don't see this kind of story where someone who's healthy and they think a lot, or they are in the culture and they're acting and they're working and busy, and then they start to read, and that's it. And then that's what transforms them, is they start to think and debate and learn how to reason better with other people, and then they become a better person. You don't see that, right? If there's a movie like that, tell me. It'd be great to see it, to have something like that. So you don't really see movies like that. Now, you might say, well, it's a movie, it wouldn't be interesting. Maybe. I think you could make it interesting, though. But anyway, the point is that I think that's an example of, you have these two things: revering the body and not really revering the mind. Now, I could say and try to push people into reading more poetry, more literature, more science, more mathematics, and really taking history courses and taking courses online throughout their whole life. I could try to push you in that degree and still be pro body, right? And I think that's what's going on with Wordsworth. Is Wordsworth is pushing people to go out into nature as a reaction, because it's all, again, think of all the exercise. It's all about exercise, getting your beach bod. And I'm like, get your mind bod, get your sexy mind, summer bod or whatever for your summer mind. There you go. Get a summer mind, not a summer bod. And, now that doesn't mean I'm against working out. I go to the gym every single day. I love going to the gym. I think it's profoundly important, but I'm not going to stress that, right? That's not going to be something I'm talking about all the time, because I'm reacting against this other thing, which is all summer bod, all bod. That's all everybody cares about, and the general public. And that is the problem. And I think that's what Wordsworth is doing, is he is saying people are against, nobody's looking at, no one's valuing or thinking about reality and nature and thinking for yourself and going out in reality and taking in all of nature and reality and looking around and coming up with your own imagination and going inward. And instead they are only looking at books and not thinking. So he's not against books. He's reacting against a certain form or certain way of looking at only books. Okay, a last little thing I want to talk about or just bring up real quickly is that Wordsworth's poems and his nature poems are not typical nature poems. So a lot of nature poems, they will just flat out describe nature. They'll describe a scene, right? There's hills, and they'll maybe paint the hills very beautifully with words. And, so that's a normal nature poem that describes the natural world through visual imagery and rigid accuracy. But with Wordsworth, he captures nature through the experience of an engaged participant. And this is what makes it romantic. This is what makes it romanticism, is that it's not just man in nature, it's man in nature experiencing nature. The emphasis is on his experience and the way that he experiences it. And that's what you kind of get in the totality of his poems and his nature poems like this, where he'll do a lot of these kinds of nature poems where he'll describe something, but it's not just his description. Like the Lines poems near Richmond, where it's not just that we did last week, where it's not just him standing on the Thames River in London or near London in a town called Richmond, and he's looking out at nature. But it's not just, let me describe in detail so a painter can paint this, what I'm seeing. It's the inner feeling he has at that location, and then he's trying to invoke that in you. And this, I think, is what's revolutionary to the Romantics, is the emphasis on the inner world of the artist and invoking or evoking that in the person, the reader. So that's an important element, is that it's not just describing something blandly and naturalistically or journalistically. The green luscious land was this. It's not like that. It's his inner state as expressed in relation to the world. So it's a much more symbiotic relationship between the reality around him and his inner world. So that's the last thing I want to say about this poem. And we're going to get the tables turned next week, where we're going to see a kind of an argument in the other sense, again, or in relation to books and what books do. Now, he's not going to make an argument for books exactly, but he's going to just kind of take the other side a little bit. So we'll see what that looks like next time.